Tobias Redmont woke before the sun touched the low ridgeline, as he always did, because sleep had never come easy since the day soldiers rode away with smoke on their boots and his family in the ground behind them. The little house he had built after that day creaked around him as the cool of night slipped away. He sat on the edge of the bunk, listening. No wind in the eaves. No coyotes yipping. No hooves on hard pan. Just the faint drip of water in the bucket by the door, and his own breath, steady and thin. He pulled on his boots and stepped out into the gray edge of morning. The desert lay flat and colorless, sage and greasewood turned to ash shapes in the half-light. His well, a stone ring about 20 paces from the door, was a black circle in the pale ground. He crossed to it, working the rope by habit. The pulley squeaked. The bucket bumped aside. He hauled it up and dipped the gourd, bringing it to his lips. The taste stopped him. The water had always been sweet here, with a faint mineral shadow. Now it carried a sour, bitter tang that hit the back of his throat like penny metal. He spat it out and watched the wet patch darken the dust. Tobias dipped again, slower this time, and sniffed. A faint sheen rode the surface in the first light, rainbow colors that did not belong in any honest well. He lowered the bucket back with more care than a man usually used for wood and rope. A seasoned horseman can feel a bad saddle before he swings up. A man who has drawn from the same hole in the ground every day for 8 years can tell when someone has dirtied it. He straightened slowly, eyes narrowing on the horizon. The ridge to the west cut the sky. Beyond it lay dry draws, a few scattered springs, and more emptiness. Nothing moved over there yet. But eastward, faint and far, a thread of dust already hung in the air, thin as smoke. Riders. He rubbed his thumb across the stubble on his jaw. Poison in a well and riders on the move were not two separate facts. They touched. Men who wanted Tobias Redmont gone had decided that a rope or bullet might raise questions. Dry tongues and dead stock did not. He walked to the corral. The 2 horses there, an old sorrel mare and a gray gelding, nosed at the empty trough. He shooed them back from the well and tipped the bucket over, wasting the tainted water rather than let anything living touch it. "Sorry, girl," he murmured to the mare. "We'll have to borrow our drink elsewhere." There were a handful of hidden seeps in those hills, and Tobias knew each one the way a preacher knows his own Bible. One in particular came to mind now, a narrow trickle at the base of a sandstone wall, shaded half the day. He had found it once, when grief drove him wandering without aim, and he had not been alone then. Ayanna had been there too, hair wet, rifle across her lap. They had shared water in wary silence, each knowing more than either said. That had been before Colonel Bradley's men burned her village, and before Tobias stopped going anywhere he did not strictly have to. The distant dust plume thickened, spreading like a smudge across the brightening sky. Tobias fetched 2 empty canteens and a small keg, slung them into his wagon, and hitched the gray. He did not bother to latch the cabin door. If the riders coming were friends, a bar across the wood would not be needed. If they were the men he suspected, a bar would not hold. The wagon rattled toward the low draw that led to the ridge. The sun climbed fast, burning pink out of the sky, and leaving only a hard blue that promised another day of heat without apology. Pebbles jumped under the wheels. Dry mesquite scratched at the axles. In the shelter of the draw, the air cooled a little. Tobias guided the wagon to a stand of scrub, tied off the reins, and climbed the rest of the way on foot. As he neared the notch where the seep lay, voices reached him. A low murmur, a child's cough, the soft cluck of someone soothing a horse. He eased up beside a boulder and looked down. Half a dozen Apache women, knelt around the thin line of water sliding from the rock. 3 children sat close, eyes heavy, lips cracked. An old man leaned on a stick nearby, his braids gone almost entirely gray. The ponies, tethered in the shade of a pinon tree, were ribby and dull-coated. Ayanna was there among them, one knee in the wet sand as she held a damp cloth to a boy's forehead. Her hair was braided tight, but stray strands stuck to the sweat on her neck. A rifle lay within arm's reach, as natural beside her as a second limb. Tobias watched a moment. They moved like people who had come a long way without enough water. Not a hunting party. Not raiders. Refugees, pushed from one dry place to the next. He cleared his throat and stepped into view. Die. Every head snapped up. Hands went to knives and gunstocks. Ayanna's fingers were on her rifle before the echo of his footstep died, barrel swinging toward him with unhurried certainty. "Tobias Redmont," she said, "I thought you had buried yourself and your anger under that little house." "I tried," he answered. "The ground keeps spitting me back out." Her eyes flicked past him, measuring the draw, the wagon hidden below, the empty sky. She did not ask if he had come alone. She counted shadows and signs, the way any careful person did in a land that killed the careless. "You come for water," she said. "And to keep my horses standing," he answered. "My well at the house is spoiled." Smells of lead and lye. A faint sound went through the group, like wind moving through dry grass. The old man said something in Apache, sharp and bitter. Ayanna's gaze hardened. "They turned you out the same way they try to turn us," she said. "Drying you like meat." "They wearing blue coats?" Tobias asked. She nodded once. "Bradley's men not. He wears more braid on his shoulders now, but his mouth still smiles when he signs papers that let other men do dirty work." Tobias felt old anger slide up from wherever it slept in him. Colonel Bradley had been a major the day Sarah died. The promotion told a story all its own. "They've been riding this country hard," Ayanna went on. "Closing springs, marking ground, ordering us off rivers where we have always drunk. Yesterday they nailed a notice to a cottonwood at the canyon water. Said the United States now owns all land from the mission south to the Big Mesa and all water upon it. Any Apache found drinking there is a thief. Water thieves," Tobias said, dry. "That's a new word for people who were here first." Ayanna gave a humorless huff. "They say we may drink when soldiers stand watch. They say we must give names to the men at the lists. Those who sign will be allowed to live beside the water in little squares. Those who do not will be moved elsewhere, where they say there is other land, reservation," Tobias said, the word bitter. "A place marked on a map in an office back east where no one has ever seen the dust that blows there." The boy she had been tending coughed again. The sound was dry and tearing. Ayanna dampened the cloth once more, using water with a miser's care. "You'll drain this seat before noon with this many," Tobias said quietly. "There's another trickle farther along under that red outcrop," he pointed. "Shallow, but shaded. Enough to ease the little ones. Why help us?" The old man snapped in accented English. "Your people bring these soldiers. Some of my people," Tobias said. "Some of yours ride with them too when it suits them. I'm not here on account of blood. I'm here because whoever poisoned my well doesn't mean to stop with my patch of dirt." Ayanna studied his face. Years ago, he had seen contempt in her eyes when she looked at him, a settler who had thought he could live on Apache land without paying the same cost. Today he saw something different behind the suspicion, weariness that matched his own. "You think these riders come for you," she said. "I think they come for any soul that still believes land and water answer to more than Bradley's pen," he replied. And I saw dust south too when I left the house. A longer trail. That'll be his main column. She straightened slowly, cloth twisting in her hand. South, she repeated. Toward the big mesa, there was a broad, flat-topped hill, a day's ride from here, where a spring spilled from the stone into a shallow basin. The mission folk drew from it. So did small ranchers and Apache families, who stayed close to the mesa in hard years. Tobias had rested there himself once, wetting his hat in his face while children laughed on the rocks. If he takes that, Tobias said, he holds every throat in this part of the territory. Ayanna's jaw set. He already tried to close it, she said. The priest from the mission sent word to us 2 nights ago. He begged for help, said soldiers would come with papers and guns. We were riding that way when Bradley's patrol found us at the river and chased us off every water we turned to. They herd us like cattle, Tobias. Today they mean to pen the rest, and the mission folk, Tobias asked. What did they say? They said they would stand at their own well with their own guns and papers, she answered. But paper burns quickly. A child tugged at her skirt and spoke softly. She laid a hand on his head, her features softening for a heartbeat. You can ride away from this, she said, looking back at Tobias. Find some other little hole in the ground. Live with your ghosts. I tried living with ghosts, he said. They make poor company. He glanced toward the south, where the land rose in broken folds toward the mesa. He knew every arroyo and shelf and old trail between here and there. Somewhere in those folds lay an old freight cut. An unfinished road blasted into a side canyon when a company had tried to put a line through. They had quit when the rock turned bad and the money dried up. Tobias had worked there one summer, hauling powder and setting charges. He remembered cool shade, overhanging stone, and a side shaft where the rock had broken easy. How many with you that can still ride hard? He asked. Ayanna's eyes sharpened at his tone. 4 women, myself, and the old man enough to sit a saddle, she said. 3 children who cannot. How much water do you carry? Enough to get to the mesa if the sun is gentle, she said. But the sun is never gentle now, he nodded, thinking fast, seeing the land not as it lay, but as weight and shadow and heat. Bradley comes with a column, he said. He means to arrive at that spring with full barrels and full rifles. He expects scattered Apaches and a few priests. If instead he finds people already dug in and someone who knows his tricks, he let the thought hang. Ayanna tilted her head. You want to stand at that water with us? I want to keep him from owning every drink between here and the mountains, Tobias said. I can't do it alone, the old man snorted. 1 white man and a handful of women against a column of cavalry. You are foolish, Tobias Redmont. That may be, Tobias said. But sometimes foolish is the only thing left to try. Ayanna looked from him to the children, to the thin thread of water. Time pressed at her. It lived in the angle of the sun and the way the rider's dust moved on the horizon. If we ride straight for the mesa with tired ponies and sick children, she said, we will reach it late, thirsty, and already surrounded. She paused. You have another road in your head. He nodded toward the north ridge. There's an unfinished freight road cuts under the flank of the mesa, he said. Carved into stone when some men tried to drag wagons where they didn't belong. It ends in a box canyon with walls high enough to shade a town. There's a side tunnel there, cool and dry. If we move now, we can put the children and the old ones in that tunnel with water. Then we can be at the mesa from the backside before Bradley marches in from the front. And then, Ayanna asked. And then we see how much his men want to die of thirst for the sake of his pride, Tobias said. Her lips pressed together. You speak of trapping them. I speak of giving them a choice, he said. Lay down their guns and walk away with their lives in a story to tell back east, or sit in the heat until they see Bradley cares more for paper than their tongues. And if they choose to fight? She asked. Then we do what we have to, Tobias said. But I'd rather win men's minds than cut their throats. She studied him for a long moment. In the end, it was not his words that decided her. It was the child at her knee, licking at the damp cloth as if it were a feast. We will go with you, she said. For our own sake. Not for yours. That's enough, he said. They moved quickly. Two of the women and the old man led the children toward the freight cut, guiding the ponies at a slow, steady pace that would not burn them out. Tobias and Ayanna and the remaining pair rode hard for the mesa's shadow, taking a route that stayed low between the folds of the land. By midday, the sky was white-hot, and the air shimmered above the rocks. They reached the freight road, a narrow shelf chipped into the canyon wall, wide enough for a wagon but no more. Old drill holes pocked the stone. Black powder scars still smudged some of the ledges. At the end of the cut, the canyon widened abruptly and then stopped, stone rising sheer on three sides. A broken wagon, gray with age, lay half-rotted against one wall. A side tunnel yawned in shadow, cool air breathing out of it like the inside of a cellar. The old man and the children were already there, leading the ponies into the tunnel mouth. The little one's eyes were wide in the dimness, but the air was mercifully cooler than outside. There's a crack in the back wall, Tobias said, pointing. Sometimes water weeps there. It won't pour, but it'll wet cloth and lips if you're patient. Ayanna nodded and spoke to the old man. He grumbled, but began organizing the women, settling the children, rationing the skins. They had done this before, in other holes in other hard years. Tobias walked back to the canyon mouth and looked up. The rim was jagged, but climbable. Beyond it, the flank of the mesa sloped toward the spring and the mission. We go up there, he said. From the top we can see the spring and Bradley's approach. If we're lucky, we talk before shots start. If we are not, Ayanna asked. He touched the rock wall with his palm. Then this canyon becomes our wall, he said. It's narrow, easy to block. I know how to make stone move at the wrong time for the men beneath it. You still carry powder, she asked. I carry knowledge, he said. A few wedges and a good lever can do what dynamite does if a man has patience. They climbed to the rim and eased toward the mesa. The land opened below them in a slow, dry sweep. The mission's low buildings crouched near the spring, a few whitewashed walls, a small bell tower, a scatter of corrals. People moved down there, women filling buckets, men stacking brush, a priest in his dark robe standing by the pool with a Bible under his arm and a rifle leaning against a rock. Beyond them, dust rolled. Bradley's column was on the move, a brown cloud with blue at its heart. Ayanna lay on her stomach beside Tobias, watching the tiny soldiers grow larger as they came. How many? She asked. 36 by the look, he said. 2 wagons. That's a deal of water and powder. She made a soft clicking sound with her tongue. He brings enough men to shoot us all twice, she said. Then we give him something to think about before he spends them, Tobias answered. They slid down the back slope and walked toward the spring from the rear, hands held away from their weapons. The mission folk turned as they approached. Guns lifted, then lowered, as faces recognized Tobias and the Apache woman, whose people sometimes traded baskets and meat for flour. Father Miguel, Tobias called. You asked for help. We brought some. The priest's lined face creased deeper. I asked the Lord, he said. I did not know he would send you two, Bradley's riding this way, Tobias said. And he has changed his manner since last you saw him. The priest's mouth tightened. His men came last week with papers, he said. They said we must fence the spring and let soldiers stand between us and the water, to keep out undesirable elements. I told them no man has the right to stand between a thirsty throat and God's gift. How many guns have you? Ayanna asked, cutting through the talk. A handful, said one of the ranchers by the corral. And not much powder. Most of us came to talk, not to fight. Talking may not be what Bradley has in mind, Tobias said. He explained, quickly, about the freight cut and the box canyon and the idea of using heat and thirst as a mirror for the colonel's own cruelty. The ranchers did not much trust Apaches. The Apaches did not much trust ranchers. The priests did not much trust either. But all of them trusted the look of the land and the memory of dried wells. If he takes this spring, the priest said quietly, he holds not only my church, but every hungry child from here to the border. What we're offering, Tobias said, is a way to make his men see that for themselves. They did not have time for a council. Bradley's dust was already close. In the end, it came down to the same thing such choices always did. Who had more to lose by doing nothing? They agreed. When Bradley's column rode up, the spring was ringed with people standing in plain sight, mission folk, a few ranchers, and Ayanna with her rifle across her arms. Tobias stood beside the priest, hat low, hands visible. The soldiers halted at a shouted command. The wheels of the wagons creaked as they stopped. The horses blew, tossing their heads. Bradley rode to the front, immaculate despite the dust. Stripes on his sleeves, bright metal on his shoulders. At his side rode a younger man, his chin still soft under the brim of his hat. "Father," Bradley called, voice carrying across the hot basin. "I had expected you to be a more reasonable man, and I had hoped you might grow a conscience with your promotion," Father Miguel answered. A ripple ran through the troopers at the priest's tone. Bradley's mouth tightened. "You stand on land held by the United States government," he said. "This water is under Army administration. My orders are to secure it for lawful use. That means no Apache camps within sight of that pool, no uncontrolled gatherings, and no weapons in civilian hands. So the hungry may drink only when you approve," Ayanna said. Bradley's gaze shifted to her and cooled another degree. "The Apaches have treaty land," he said. "They may go there. Or they may enlist as scouts and serve under white officers. Those are their choices. You forgot die of thirst," Tobias said. "Seems you've added that to the list lately." Bradley's eyes found him. Recognition flashed, followed by something harder. "Redmont," he said. "I wondered what rock you had crawled under. The one you tried to dry out this morning," Tobias said. Bradley's jaw clenched. "You will leave this place," he said. "All of you. My men will take charge of the spring. We'll issue water in an orderly fashion." "No," Father Miguel said simply. The word hung in the hot air. Bradley's horse stamped. He patted its neck, more for the men's sake than the animals. "If you resist," he said, "people will be hurt. You are outnumbered and outgunned. I do not wish bloodshed in front of a church, yet you do not mind it in front of a hog pen or a wickiup," Ayanna said. The young officer at Bradley's side shifted uneasily. "Seer," he murmured, "maybe we can talk. At least until—" Bradley cut him off with a flick of his hand. "Joseph," he said, "you will hold your tongue. Joseph." Tobias filed the name away. "This is your last warning," Bradley called. Lower your weapons, step away from the water. Or, Tobias asked. Or I clear you by force, Bradley said. And whatever happens after will be on your heads. The ranchers near the corral exchanged glances. Some gripped their rifles tighter. Some swallowed and thought of wives and children at home. The priest made the sign of the cross, not in front of himself, but toward the soldiers. Then may God weigh whose heads bear what, he said softly. Tobias took a breath that tasted of dust and old fear. You remember Lobo Flats? He asked Bradley. The day your men fired on a woman carrying bedding out of her own doorway. Bradley's face did not change, but his fingers tightened on the reins. You are a deserter and a criminal, he said. I am under no obligation to listen to your slanders. Maybe your men are, Tobias said. He raised his voice. Any of you ride with Captain Morrison at the flats? Any of you remember flames and little bodies, and a report that called it necessary action? The column stirred. One man down the line swallowed hard. Another looked at the ground. The young officer, Joseph, stared at Tobias as if seeing him properly for the first time. Bradley's voice cracked like a whip. Enough, he said. Troop, form line. Prepare to advance. The troopers hesitated, just long enough for doubt to show. Ayanna lifted her rifle, not aimed at any man, just a symbol. The ranchers did the same. The priest set his Bible down and picked up his gun, hand steady. That canyon road behind you, Tobias called, quickly, before lead started to fly. The one your scouts marked this morning as a good place to circle. It's narrow with shade on the walls. Looks like shelter from the sun. Bradley frowned, thrown by the shift. What are you babbling about? You want this water that badly, Tobias said. Fine, P. We move off it. You can have the basin. You and your men go sit in that cut until evening while you think about how many mouths you mean to own. We'll leave you your wagons and your barrels. We'll bring you more if you choose right. Choose? Bradley scoffed. My orders are clear. I do not bargain with hostiles. I'm not bargaining for myself, Tobias said. I'm offering your boys a way to keep breathing. He turned his head slightly, pitching his voice enough that the troopers could hear, but Bradley would feel it slipping past him. You go into that canyon, he called. You'll find shade in tight stone. If your colonel decides to sit there until you have squeezed this land dry, you'll feel exactly what he's been dealing out to every Apache camp between here and the border. You'll drink from barrels and watch the sky and wait for orders that don't care if your tongue cracks. Bradley wheeled his horse around. That's enough, Redmont, he snapped. Advance, he dug in his spurs. The first few horses moved. Others hesitated. Men looked from their colonel to the spring, to the church, to the Apache rifles on the rise behind. Then, as if something broke, they surged forward, but not all the way. Tobias fired a single shot. The bullet struck the ground between Bradley's horse and the spring, kicking up a puff of dust. The sound cracked across the basin like a whip, and in the echo Ayanna's women fired too, warning shots into the baked earth, chips flying. Horses reared. Men cursed. Nobody yet had a hole in his hide, but the air shook with the promise of it. Tobias, the priest hissed. Easy, Tobias said. Nobody aims for hearts unless they have to. Bradley fought his horse down. You will regret that, he said, breathing hard. Tobias met his gaze and saw, to his surprise, not only anger there, but something like calculation. Bradley knew this was a ground that could swallow him if he made the wrong move. Take the canyon, Tobias said, quieter now, so that the colonel had to choose to hear. Sit there with your men. We'll move back to our freight cut and leave this basin between us. No one fires, no one charges. You take the time to consider whether you want to be remembered as the man who turned water into a weapon. And if I march straight through you and hang you all from your own crosses, Bradley asked. Then you'll have to ride through a kill box we've already prepared, Tobias said. You saw what a few moments of doubt did to your line just now. Imagine what a rockfall and dying horses will do. He was gambling that Bradley did not want that, not truly. Men like Bradley liked clean reports and words like secured and pacified, not stories of columns crushed under stone. The colonel's nostrils flared. He looked at the canyon road, at the freight cut on the distant rise, at the Apache faces on the rim. Joseph spoke softly beside him. Father, he said, maybe we can sit in the shade and talk terms. At least for a day. Bradley's eyes flicked to his son's face. For a moment, something like pain moved there. Then, it was gone. Very well, he said at last. We'll take your canyon, Redmont. For now. Troop, by file, into the cut. The column moved, grumbling, relieved, suspicious. The wagons creaked after. Dust rose again, thicker now. Ayanna exhaled slowly. You put a wolf in a box, he murmured. We must be sure the lid holds. They waited until the last wagon wheel disappeared into the mouth of the canyon. Then Tobias led the way along the ridge, keeping low, until they reached the box end, where the old freight road stopped in stone. From above they watched the soldiers settle, stacking arms, loosening collars, dipping cups into the 2 barrels the wagons held. The canyon walls gave shade, but the air did not move much. Heat pooled there, thick as smoke. Not much water for so many, Ayanna said quietly. They thought the spring would fill the rest, Tobias answered. He showed her where the rock was weak near the canyon's middle, where old drill holes and cracks lined up like scars. They set wedges there, working from above, using poles as levers and stones as hammers. With every tap, dust drifted down. With every wedge set, Tobias felt a line pulled taut. We don't bring it all at once, he said. Just enough to choke the way out if he decides to charge. Below, the soldiers sat and waited. An hour passed. The sun climbed, then slid toward afternoon. The barrels sank an inch. Bradley tried to keep his men busy, sending patrols to the mouth, having them clear rocks, count ammunition, check harness. But the canyon walls turned his commands into echoes, and echoes sounded like doubt. When the light grew long enough to send knives of sun into the cut, Tobias judged it was time. He and Ayanna climbed down a little way, making sure they were visible, but out of easy rifle range. Their shadows stretched long on the stone. Bradley, Tobias called. His voice bounced from wall to wall. How's that fine government shade sitting with you? The colonel looked up from where he sat on a crate, hat off, hair damp with sweat. His coat lay folded beside him. Without it, he looked less like a symbol and more like a tired man in a dirty shirt. You've made your point, he said. Is there some purpose to this besides torment? There is, Tobias said. I want your men to see what you've been doing to others. Now they've felt a taste. You can keep them here until the barrels run dry, or you can walk them out of this canyon unarmed and alive. Murmurs ran through the ranks below. Men shifted. One, the sunburned Private Tobias had noticed earlier, licked cracked lips and stared at the shadow where the barrels stood. You mean to take us prisoner? Bradley asked. I mean to send you east, Tobias said. You, and that captain of yours who likes to burn camps. You'll stand before whoever signed your orders and tell them exactly how you carried them out. On what authority? Bradley demanded. On the authority of every corpse left by a dry river, Ayanna said, voice low and hard. On the authority of every woman turned away from a well by a man with a badge. Joseph moved to the canyon wall and looked up at them. His face was flushed with heat, his eyes red. Is it true? He asked, not of Tobias this time, but of his father. About the wells, Bradley's silence was answer enough. I rode with Captain Morrison, Joseph said slowly. He told me we were clearing raiders from the trails, that we were keeping settlers safe. But I saw, he swallowed. I saw a woman with a baby chased from a spring at dusk. She stumbled in the dark. The baby hit its head. Morrison laughed and called it bad luck. Ayanna closed her eyes for a heartbeat. When she opened them again, they shone with a light that was not quite anger and not quite grief. You saw, she said. And you stayed. I stayed because I thought there was no other way, Joseph said, voice raw. Because I told myself if I left, worse men would take my place. He looked up at Tobias. What do you want me to do now? Tell the truth, Tobias said simply. Wherever anyone will hear it, Bradley pushed himself to his feet. You will not turn my own son against me, he said. I think you did that yourself, Tobias answered. The colonel drew in a slow, shaky breath. Men, he called. You have heard the accusations of a known traitor and an Apache agitator. You have felt heat and a bit of thirst. Do you really mean to throw away your honor because of a few hard hours? Wilson, the sunburned private, licked his lips again. Sir, he said hoarsely, my sister died of bad water back home. I didn't sign on to make sure other folks' sisters go the same way. Your sister is dead because men like these kill settlers, Bradley snapped, pointing upward. We kill men who burn our houses, Ayanna said. We do not ride around poisoning holes in the ground. Sergeant Blake, arm in a sling from a rock that had fallen earlier when a wedge slipped, stood slowly. Seer, he said, voice tired, with respect. This feels wrong. I came out here to fight men with guns, not women with empty buckets. Are you refusing my orders? Bradley asked. Blake looked up at Tobias, at Ayanna, then back at his colonel. He took a deep breath. I'm refusing to die of pride, he said. He reached down, unbuckled his gun belt, and let it drop. The revolver thudded in the dust. The sound seemed to shake something loose in the canyon. Wilson did the same. Then, another. Metal hit rock in a stuttering rhythm. Bradley stared around him, unbelieving. You lay down those arms, he said quietly, and you are all finished. No postings, no pensions. You will be nothing and no one. Better that than ghosts, Wilson said. Joseph's hands trembled as he unbuttoned his own holster. He met his father's eyes. I'm sorry, he said. But if I keep that gun after what I've heard, that's a kind of death, too. The belt slipped from his fingers. Only a handful of men kept their weapons then, Morrison among them, his face twisted. You fools, the captain hissed. You think they'll let you walk away? They'll shoot you in the back the minute you climb out of this hole. If we meant to kill you all, Ayanna said, we would have dropped the rest of that wall at noon. Morrison whirled, raising his rifle toward her. Tobias saw it before Bradley did. He put his shoulder to the wedge nearest him and heaved. Stone shifted. A chunk of rock, the size of a horse's head, tore free above Morrison and crashed down on his shoulder. The rifle went off wild. The captain screamed and went to his knees, his gun skittering away. Dust boiled up. When it cleared, Morrison lay pinned, breathing but broken, his free hand clawing weakly at the dirt. Bradley stared at him, then up at Tobias. The colonel's face seemed suddenly older. The skin around his eyes scored deeper. "What will you do with us?" he asked, voice flat. "We'll march you to the mission," Tobias said. "We'll write down what happened here while it's still sharp in everyone's minds. You'll sign your name under it. Then we'll send you east with copies and half a dozen saddlebags so no one rider can disappear the story on the trail. And if those men back east do nothing," Bradley asked. "Then the blame is on them too," Ayanna said. "But you will have done what you can before you stand before whatever judge waits after death." Bradley let out a long breath. "You think this is mercy," he said. "It is," Tobias said. "You deserve a rope. Instead, you get years to remember each face you harmed." Slowly, Bradley unbuckled his belt and let it join the rest on the ground. They came out of the canyon in a long, strange procession. Disarmed soldiers, sunburnt and dusty. Officers bound at the wrists. Apache women with rifles. Ranchers with old shotguns. A priest walking between them with his Bible under one arm and a ledger under the other. At the mission, they drank. Small cups, carefully counted. No one was allowed to forget how scarce water could be. Father Miguel wrote by lamplight until his hand cramped, taking down each man's words. Tobias spoke of Lobo Flats. Ayanna spoke of burned camps and nailed notices. Wilson spoke of a sister's grave. Blake spoke of orders that had never sat right. Joseph Bradley spoke of a moment on a canyon rim when he heard his father's silence louder than any rifle. Bradley himself spoke last. He did not excuse. He did not adorn. He listed dates and places and signatures, the language of a man who had lived by paper. When he finished, he signed his name, handshaking only once. Within days, riders carried copies of that ledger south to the territorial capital, north to the railhead, and east along the mail trails. Some packets vanished. Others did not. Months later, word came back in the form of men with badges and federal papers who took Bradley and Morrison away in chains. What happened after was far from perfect. Punishments were argued, softened, changed. Some officers slipped out from under blame. New men took old posts. Water still shone brighter than any coin. But not every youth who stood before a recruiting sergeant afterward saw nothing but glory. Some remembered snippets of a story told over whiskey, about a colonel sitting in a stone box, sweating under his own orders, and a son who refused to aim his gun at people whose only crime was wanting to drink. Ayanna's people were given a narrow strip of ground by the seep in the freight cut, ink on paper this time saying they might stay. It would never match what they had lost, but it was soil they could call their own without looking over their shoulders each morning. Children splashed where the water slid from stone. The old man planted corn and scolded crows in 2 languages. Tobias tried for a while to go back to his cabin. The well there never tasted right again, even after he'd hauled out every bucketful and scrubbed the stones. Some poison sank deeper than a man could reach. One evening, after watching the sky darken over the empty corral, he saddled the gray gelding and rolled up his few blankets. He packed Sarah's worn Bible, a tin cup, and a hammer. The house behind him felt full of echoes and dust. Mary Hendricks, one of the mission women who'd cooked for Bradley's men before seeing too much, stood near the gate with her baby on her hip. The child clutched his thumb and stared solemnly at Tobias. "Father Miguel says I've kin in Denver," Mary said. "Says I should go before this place remembers it's still dangerous." "He is not wrong," Tobias said. "I don't much fancy the trail alone," she said. "Even with others headed that way," he adjusted the saddle cinch. "Then you won't ride it alone," he said. I've got no place I have to be more than any other. Might as well see you safe as far as I can swing a leg over this horse. Mary smiled, small and tired. Why? She asked. Because if I stay, I'll dry out like that poisoned well, he thought. Because a man can't spend his whole life paying back one day of cowardice and grief by hiding. Because I can, he said simply. Ayanna rode up from the direction of the freight cut as he swung into the saddle. She reined in, studying the bundle behind his saddle and the woman at the gate. You go, she said. For a while, he answered. Maybe farther. Maybe not. She nodded. There will be more men like Bradley, she said. And more like Joseph. Remember, which ones need your anger and which need your words. I'm better with a hammer than a sermon, he said. You swung both well enough, she said. Her mouth curved briefly. Walk in a good way, Tobias Redmont. You too, Ayanna. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat, turned the gray toward the track that led east, and nudged him forward. Mary's borrowed mare fell in beside him, the baby gurgling at the bounce. Behind them, the mesa watched, and the freight cut held its thin line of water and its circle of houses. Ahead, the land spread wide and uncertain. The road did not care what a man had been, only what he would do the next time. Someone stood between a thirsty child and a well. Tobias listened to the steady clop of hooves and the soft breath of the desert wind, and for the first time in years, the sound inside his chest did not feel like an echo from a grave, but like something still alive, stubborn and slow, willing to keep going. He tightened his hand gently on the reins and rode on. Endu,